Welcome to Full Stack Svelte. We are very excited to have you join us in building a full stack SaaS application with Svelte.js, Express.js, and Postgres. A little bit about the author. I'm Blair. I'm a full stack web developer. I'm a certified Scrum product owner, so I've done some team lead work as well. I've contributed to the Vue.js docs, and I'm really excited about JavaScript these days between React, Vue, Svelte, and all the other really cool stuff going on in the space. And you can find me at github.com/FreemanG. What we are building. To demonstrate the capabilities of Svelte, we're building a school lunch menu content management system. So the idea is that we'll build an app that school administrators can use to publish a weekly school lunch menu, and then parents and students could view that menu and see what kind of food would be served. So the application will have a public landing page with a sign-up feature, and then some secured data administration pages that registered users would use, and then another public page for the non-registered users to view the lunch menus. So it's not too complicated of an application, but it hits a lot of concepts that are really important. So things on the front end like input binding, reactivity, conditional rendering, and then things on the back end like REST endpoints, persistence with Postgres, and then in order to make it secured, we'll integrate it with Auth0 to have a security layer, and we'll use JSON web tokens, aka JWTs, to accomplish that. So the application will be separated into two main parts. We'll have the front end, where we use Svelte to create a reactive web-based UI, and then we'll have the back end, where we use Express to create, read, update, and delete data that's used by the front end. And here's a look at the high-level application architecture. So on the browser side, we've got our Svelte front end, and we'll make REST API network calls with a library called Axios. And so our Svelte front end will talk to the Express backend that'll host that API. And then the Express backend will use Nex to run SQL queries to insert and read and delete data, etc., from our Postgres database. In addition to those main technologies, we'll also use NPM for package management and Auth0 for JWT authentication. So one thing before we start building the application that we can look at are the front-end routes. So we'll have just a few different front-end routes, and each of these will be a page that will let a user accomplish some sort of functionality. So imagine that we own the domain schoollunch.com. So we'll have a base root route that'll be our public marketing landing page, and it'll describe the service and contain a call to action for a registration function. And then for registered users, we'll have a couple of routes under /admin where they can view a list of weeks, and they can create new weeks, and then they can click on those weeks and drill down into a detailed weekly management page where they can actually set the menu details for that given week. And then lastly, we'll have a nice looking route that shows the menu for a given school for a given week. And so that's the one that non-registered users will use. So I'll give you a quick look here at the final product. So we've got our landing page here with a little bit of description about the service and registration features. So once you're a registered user, you can log in, and we integrate with Auth0. So we get sent over to an Auth0 login page. And then once we log in with Auth0, we get redirected back to the app. And so here's the kind of the admin section. And so from here you can add lunch weeks, You can click on an existing lunch week and view the details. And so, for example, here we've populated the daily details for this week. And then from this page, you can save the details. You can publish them if they're not already published, and then get a link to the public page where viewers can view those details. So that's pretty much it for the high level. Like I said, we'll hit a lot of these different concepts. We'll take things slow. We'll kind of build incrementally and get a lot of really good wins along the way. And we're really excited to have you. So welcome on. Now that we've covered the high-level design for our application, we can talk development environment setup. So for our app, we will run a local Svelte environment and also a local Express environment. And for both of those, we'll need Node.js. If you don't already have Node, head over to nodejs.org and download the appropriate installer for your operating system. In addition to Node, we'll also need Git. And we don't need Git from a source control perspective, but it's required for just one step, which is the Svelte project initialization. Of course, you can also use it for source control too. And then this project will use a lot of command line operations. And so optionally, it's nice to have a more powerful command line tool. For Macs, iterm2 is a good option. And for Windows, Commander is a good option. And both of these offer tab-based command line instances. So you can have multiple tabs or multiple command line instances open at once. And this can be helpful when you're trying to run several things at once. For Commander, you may need to edit your path system environment variable. And essentially what this means is just pointing your path to the bin directory for the commands you want to run. For example, the node command and the git command. So here's a look at iterm2. And in my setup, I can run a node command from any directory. So for example, I can run node-v, and that'll tell me the version of node or any other node command. And likewise, I can also run a git command from any directory as well. So if you're having a little bit of trouble, you may need to look at some tutorials and figure out how to point your path to those executables that you want to run. And then lastly, we're going to need a nice text editor. And VS Code is a fantastic open source option that's becoming really popular for JavaScript development. Here's a quick look at VS Code. And VS Code lets you have multiple files open at once. And it does a lot of really nice code highlighting. There's various plugins that help you with formatting. And it also has an integrated terminal and an integrated Git instance. And then you can browse around the files on the left-hand panel here within your project, so you can pretty easily move in between files. So as we spoke before, the project will be organized into a school lunch overarching directory, and then a backend directory and a front-end directory underneath that. The source code for the backend Express app and the front-end Svelte app will be able to run separately in the local environment, so we'll keep them separate from an organization perspective in the file system. So we can go ahead, for the last step in this lesson, we can go ahead and create the overarching school lunch directory. So I'm just going to run mkdir school lunch, and that'll create that directory. Now in the next lesson, we'll initialize the Svelte project, which will create the front-end directory and create a lot of boilerplate Svelte files to get a Svelte project up and running. In this lesson, we're going to initialize our Svelte front-end project. If you've ever used the tools Create React App or View CLI, then the next step will be familiar to you. Svelte has a similar initialization tool that makes it really easy to initialize a Svelte project. So all we have to do is run this npx command. So I'm going to head over to the command line here, and we do need git prior to running this command. So you should be able to type in git and run a git command prior to running this command. So if you type in git and that doesn't work, then you'll need to check your path and make sure that you have git installed and configured correctly. So once we have git, we can go ahead and run the npx command. And so this command will initialize a Svelte project using a template, and the folder name that we're going to initialize the project into is just going to be front end. So we're in our school lunch directory, and we're going to initialize a Svelte project into a new folder called front end. So once we run that command, if we take a look, now we've got a front end directory. So we can go to that front end directory and then take a quick look, and you can see that the initialization created some boilerplate files, including a package.json file, and then we'll take a look in a second and look at some of the other files. But the package.json file is going to describe the npm dependencies needed for the project. And so what we can go ahead and do now is run npm install. So within the front end directory, next we need to run npm install. And so when we do that, it'll fetch down all the dependencies needed for the Svelte project. And so now if we run ls to list of files, you can see that we have a node modules directory. And so this is where all the code for all of the libraries and dependencies that we're using is going to sit. So here's the really cool part. Now that we have initialized the project and installed the dependencies, we just need to run npm run dev. And that'll fire up a local Svelte environment on port 5000. So all we have to do is head over to the browser and open up localhost 5000, and you can see your Svelte project running. So this is the local Svelte environment running local Svelte code. So let's go ahead and open up VS Code and take a look at the files that were created. So within VS Code, choose Open Folder, and then locate your school lunch project directory and go ahead and hit Open. And so this will open the whole entire project in VS Code. And then over on the left hand side, you can look at the files. So take a quick look at package.json, and this shows you the scripts that you can run. So when we ran npm run dev, it's actually running this rollup command, and that's what starts up the local dev environment. And then you can see the dev dependencies and the production dependencies. So there's not too many dependencies that are needed, but these are the ones that were installed when we ran the npm install command. And then taking a look under the source directory, there's a main.js file and an app.svelte file. And so these are just some basic files for the app. The main.js file is right here, and just a real simple introduction to Svelte. This is what harnesses the Svelte app, and it passes down a prop called name down to the app.svelte file, and then the app.svelte file actually refers to that name variable right here, and then that's what's displayed in the web page. So another really cool feature about these new JavaScript frameworks is the hot loading local dev environment. So if you remember back in the browser, it says hello world, but if we change this code to hello me and hit save, the hot loading local dev environment is going to automatically replace the code and refresh the page. So I don't even have to hit page refresh for my code to be reflected. That's a really cool feature, and it helps developer productivity a lot. So while we're here, we can go ahead and clean up a little bit of the boilerplate code that was created. We don't need all of it. So we're going to remove the props object from main.js. So right here, just get rid of this. And we're going to remove the styles from app.svelte. So in the app.svelte file, just remove this style block. And then under frontend public, we'll delete the global.css file. So frontend public, this will have CSS files and image files and so forth. We're going to get rid of this one. And then in index.html, we're going to remove the reference to that global.css file that we just deleted. So this index.html is the base HTML file for the app. And so Svelte actually gets mounted to this HTML file, and then the JavaScript handles rendering of all the remaining HTML onto the web page. So get rid of this global.css link here. Very cool. So we initialized our Svelte project and cleaned up a little bit of the boilerplate code. And that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll install and configure some tools to help keep our code formatted and clean in our local dev environment. In this lesson, we're going to talk about formatting and linting. As developers, we want to craft consistent and readable code. And even though it's a little bit of a pain, it's worth spending some extra time now to set up formatting and linting tools that'll help us keep our code clean and in some cases even catch bugs. So formatting is just like what it sounds like. It's a tool that will automatically indent and space the code. And linting is the process of statically analyzing code for problems such as undeclared variables, unused variables, and other syntax issues. In this lesson, we're going to use the prettier and ESLint extensions for VS Code, and then we'll look at a few examples of how the tools actually help. So head over to VS Code and then click the Extensions tab. Now I've already installed these extensions and some other ones, and there's tons of different extensions you can use from the marketplace, so I'd encourage you to check those out as well. But the ones we're interested in right now are prettier. So go ahead and search for that one and install it. Go ahead and install the Svelte language support for VS Code extension, and then go ahead and install ESLint as well. Now once you have those installed, I think it's really nice to format on save. So you can go to VS Code Preferences and go to Settings and then search for Format, and check the Format on Save checkbox. And so this will just automatically format your files every time you save them. Now with different versions of VS Code, sometimes this could be a little bit picky. So you may also need to set prettier in the default formatter box here. And then if you're still having trouble specifically with Svelte files, you may want to click this button here to open settings in JSON mode and add this bit of code right here. And this will specifically point the James Birtles Svelte code formatter, which is integrated with Prettier, and it'll specifically set that up with Svelte files. So you may have to tweak it and spend a little bit of time with it to get it just right. But like I said, I think it's worth it for that formatting feature. So another thing that we need to do at this point is install the prettier plugin Svelte from the command line. So copy this command here and head over to the command line. If you're running your local development environment still, you can hit Control-C to stop it. And then I'm in the front end directory, so I'm going to run this npm command. And that'll save this as, it'll install it and save it as a dev dependency in package.json. And then heading back to VS Code, we're going to set up a prettier rc.json file. And this will be configuration for prettier. So back in VS Code, go to the root of the front end project here and right click and choose new file. Create this .prettierrc.json file and then paste this configuration into that file. So these are just some rules that we're giving prettier. And so this will enforce single quotes so that we're consistent with that. And I have mine set up with semicolons as false. I'm not a semicolon in JavaScript guy. Now, of course, if you do like those, you can set that to true. And you can play with your tab width and so forth to tailor it to how you like to format your JavaScript code. So now that we have that set up, heading back to main.js, if I hit Control-S right now to save it, you'll notice that the semicolon went away. And also the double quotes went away. So now every time I save a file, even if I add semicolons in, it will automatically remove them. Let's go one step further now and look at ESLint. So we've already installed the ESLint plugin for VS Code. And next we need to run an npm command to install ESLint libraries. So go ahead and run that in your terminal. And while that's running, we also need to set up an eslintrc.json file. So we'll go ahead and set up that in the root of the project. And this will be the configuration that we use for that file. So paste that in there. And so this configuration will use a Svelte plugin. And so that'll tell ESLint to actually lint.svelte files, which we want to do. We want to do Svelte files in addition to JS files and HTML files and so forth. So this configuration will work for that. Now, in order to actually lint the files, we need to run npx eslint and tell ESLint where to lint. And so what we're going to do is add this to our npm scripts. So in package.json, we have a build script and a dev script. And this is what they look like out of the box. So we're going to update them to run our linter first. And this will be an opportunity to catch errors while we start the project. So copy this and open up package.json. And then find the script section. And at the front of the build script, add in the npx eslint command. Now, this syntax will work for Macs and Linux machines, but you might have to adjust it slightly for a Windows use case. I don't think that the /source will work on Windows. So I think that this would work on Windows. Okay, so now also copy this down to the dev command. And so we'll run our linting process on both start and dev. And so let's give this a try. So back to the command line. Now if we run npm run dev, so as you notice, it ran the linter first, and then it ran the npm, the normal dev startup process. So let's check out and see if our linter is actually working. So one of the things that linting does is it won't let you have undeclared variables. So we can set up a little test case here, and try to console log a variable that doesn't exist. So copy this into the app.svelte file and save that, and then recycle the local dev environment. So hit Control C, then hit the up arrow and run the same command again. And so now you can see an example of a linting error. So this is pretty cool because this would be a bug that we could potentially introduce into our app, and the linter caught it. So it tells you what file the error is found in and then what line number. So it's telling me to look at line 3 in the app.svelte file. And it's telling me that this is hitting the no undef linting rule. So let's get rid of that, save that, and now we've got the project cleaned up again. Very good. So we installed Prettier and ESLint, and so we've got our local dev environment set up a little bit better to make sure that we're formatting our files and also catching some bugs before they make it to production. We've made great progress, and in the next module we'll set up a Svelte router and stub out some of the pages in our application. Welcome back. In the last lesson, we initialized our Svelte project and got it running in our local dev environment. And in this lesson, we're ready to start building the app. Our project is going to be a single-page application. Single-page applications are a modern and popular style of web app where a single page is served to a user. Then when the user interacts with the single-page app, that page is dynamically updated with new data and HTML markup without doing a full-page browser refresh. So a single-page app doesn't fetch new HTML from a server when the user navigates around it. And this usually means that the user experience is very fast and reactive. A single-page app can have multiple routes in URLs, so it kind of mimics a server-rendered app. But if you watch closely, you'll notice that the browser does not do a full page refresh, e.g. there's no loading icon on the browser tab when navigating between routes. So if we take a look at the course that we're working on right now, this is actually a single page app. So watch the browser tab closely. If you navigate around to another page, you'll notice that the URL changes, but the browser is not doing a full page refresh. And if you look in view source, you'll see that it's a very basic bare bones HTML file. And so JavaScript is handling all of the rich markup and text and images and interactivity that you're seeing when you're using the course website. Now take a look at newline.co's website. And this is an example of a server rendered site. So if you watch the browser tab at the top, when I click on one of these links, you'll see that it's doing a full page refresh. So it's going to the server and it's fetching down a completely new HTML page and bringing that into the browser. So that's a totally different architecture. And for our project, we're going to build an SPA. So in order to build an SPA with Svelte, we need to install a router. So this will be a front-end router, and it'll handle routing on the front-end side and rendering the correct components based on the URL that a user has navigated to. So we need to install Svelte router spa to get started. So copy this npm command and head over to your command line. And go ahead and run that. So this is a open source library that provides single page application routing for Svelte projects. You could do a Google search and find this repository online. So this is a link to the npm registration for this project, and You can also see a link to the GitHub site for it as well. So if you check that out and you feel inclined, you can star this repository as well, which is a nice thing to do for the creators of these open source apps. And this is where you'll find the documentation for this library as well. So to get started using this library, we need to create a routes.js file. So we'll go ahead and create that file now. Make sure you create it under the source directory. So all code for the Svelte project needs to be under the source directory. So we'll say new file, routes.js. And then paste this code into that file. So what we're doing here is we're setting up routes, and then we're pointing those routes to Svelte components. We haven't created these Svelte components yet, but we'll create them next. And so essentially we're pointing a root route to a component called home, and that will point to a file called home.svelte. And then we have a lunch menu route and an admin manage menus route, and those will also point to their respective Svelte files. So let's talk a little bit about Svelte files. Svelte files have an extension of .svelte, and they're used to create components, which are the building blocks of a Svelte application. A component can be large, such as a whole page, or it could be small, such as a date picker component or a table. And components can also import other components, so they could be nested inside components in a hierarchy. Svelte files are made up of 3 sections: a script section that holds all the JavaScript for the component, and this is where you have your state and your event handlers, and we'll be working very much in those throughout the course. Then there's a style section, and this can hold CSS styles for the component, and then a markup section where all the HTML markup goes, and we'll work with that a lot as well. So the magic of the Svelte framework is that it compiles these Svelte files into a JavaScript bundle that a browser can understand. And then when a user loads a page with that bundle, the Svelte framework handles everything else to render the HTML with the JavaScript together on the page and handle all of the interactivity and reactivity. So previously we imported 3 Svelte files into our routes.js, and so we need to actually create those files now. So let's see, we also created a directory called views/public, and then one called views/admin. So under source, create a new folder called views, and then under views, create a new folder called admin, and another one called public. So under admin, we need to create lunch menu admin.svelte. So create that file. And then under public, we'll create these other 2 files. Okay, so currently these files are completely empty. Now eventually they'll have script and maybe some CSS styles and markup, but we're going to start very simple and just get a quick win here and put some real simple HTML markup. So we've just got one div with a header 1 that is just going to show home, and then we'll change that for lunch menu view. We'll just say lunch menu view, and then likewise for lunch menu admin. Okay, so we've got our 3 Svelte files, and at this point we're not quite done yet because we haven't actually wired up the router with the main application file. So we have a file called app.svelte, and that's essentially the entry point component for the whole Svelte app. So everything's going to flow through app.svelte before the framework flows down to other components. So we need to set up our router here so that the components we're routing to will be rendered in the browser. So open up app.svelte, and this is just the old boilerplate code, so we'll get rid of that. And what we're doing here is we're importing just the router component from the npm package, and then we're importing our routes file from the one we created, routes.js. And then we have our markup section, so we've got a main HTML component here, and then we're putting the router component in there and sending the routes down. So essentially what's going to happen is when we go to the browser and go to a route that matches something from routes.js, the framework's going to handle that, and it's going to render the Svelte file or the Svelte component that we set it up to render for. Okay, now we need to do one more step. So in package.json, we need to add the -s file, and what this does is it gives us bookmarkable URLs, which I'll show you in just a second. So go to package.json, under the start script, add the -s flag. Okay, now let's give this a try. So if you already had your app running, you can hit Control-C to stop it and then start it again. I'm going to start mine up, npm run dev. And then let me open this up in the browser. And after a pause, I'm back. I wasn't expecting a blank white screen here. So obviously something went wrong. And now is a good time to go ahead and troubleshoot it, and we'll learn something in the process. So I'm going to take a look at the Chrome Dev Tools. So you can right click and choose Inspect to bring up the dev tools, and these are really powerful. I use them quite a lot during development to inspect things, to look at elements on the page, to look at network calls and troubleshoot those. But in this case, we need to look at the console. So if we look at the console, we can see an error that says source.router is not a constructor. So I've completely built this app before, and I didn't have this error, so I was a little bit surprised. And we'll talk about why this happened. So I took this error and looked at the Svelte router spa GitHub repository. So if you come over to issues, and you can do a search here. So we'll search for source.router is not a constructor. And I found a couple of issues that were filed here. And the second one actually has the solution we're going to use. So looking at this second one, people mentioned that after installing version 15 of the rollup plugin CommonJS, that they started getting this error, and that it seems to work fine with version 14. So this is a good opportunity to look at package.json and talk about versions of dependencies. So coming back to VS Code, package.json's got our dependencies, and each of these dependencies has a version number next to it. And so what happened is the first time I built the app, I initialized my Svelte project a couple of months ago, and we were not at version 16 of the rollup plugin CommonJS. And so now we're dealing with an incompatibility between this dependency and the Svelte router spa somehow. So that's essentially what caused the error. And since we're in here talking, let's discuss quickly these carets. So you may see carets in your package.json, or you may see tilde symbols, or you may see neither. So if you have a caret, that means that npm install will install 16 or 16.1 or 16.2. Anything under the major version of 16 it will accept. Now if you had a tilde, that's a little more strict, so it would only install 16.0.1 or 16.0.2, so only at the patch level. And then if you leave it completely blank, npm install would only install exactly version 16.0. So you can kind of use this to control versions of your dependencies. And what we need to do in our case is actually install specifically version 14. So we could change this to 14 and save it, and then run npm install, and that would do it. Or we can also do it by using the specific version when we install it. So we'll do it that way. So let's go over to the command line here and stop the front end app. Now we need to run npm install. We need to install this plugin. And now if you don't put a version here, it will install the latest and greatest. So what we're going to do is then add @ and we'll say 14.0.0. And that will force npm to install version 14. So run that, and now it also updates the version in the package.json, which will also save in that file. Now, if you don't have any errors, you can completely ignore this. There's a good chance that this may be resolved by the time you're doing this on your local machine. But in case you're running version 16 and it looks like version 5.8.1 of this library, you may need to do this. Okay, so let's get back on track here and start up the front end dev environment again. So npm run dev. Let's go back to our local environment here, hit refresh, and very cool. So now what we're seeing is our home component is being being rendered by the front end, and that's because we're at our root route. So just to recap, going back to routes.js, when we're at the root route, then we'll serve or render the home component. So let's test these other two, and we'll give this lunch menu route a try. Okay, so that one's rendering our lunch menu view. And then we'll give our admin manage menus route a try. Okay, so that one's working as well. And then one more thing I'll point out right now is that these routes are bookmarkable. So I keep saying the terminology serve versus render. And so what's really happening is the web server is serving a single HTML file. So it's a single page app. So if we go and view page source, we'll see this really bare bones single HTML file. So that's what the web server is serving. And then the front end is then running this JavaScript bundle, and that JavaScript bundle takes over and it renders the page for the given route. But the cool thing about front-end routers these days is that they're actually bookmarkable URLs. So I can refresh this page directly, or I could open it in another tab, and the router will still render that same route. Okay, back to our course. So we've tested our router, and we saw the home page, the lunch menu admin page, and the lunch menu view page. And we're going to cover one more Svelte concept before completing this lesson. Building dynamic HTML with Svelte is accomplished by using curly braces directly in the HTML. So what we're going to do right now is populate some JavaScript generated information directly into the page, and Svelte will handle reactivity in showing it on the page. So go over to lunchmenuadmin.svelte, and we're going to add this little section here. So lunchmenuadmin.svelte, right now we only have HTML markup, so we're going to add a script section, and then we're just going to create a very simple JavaScript variable, and this is called a state variable. So this variable is declared in the script, and Svelte is going to render that no matter what the state of that variable is Svelte will handle monitoring it and rendering it. So if we go over here, we can add any type of text we want here, and then just curly braces is what Svelte is going to look for. So when we have curly braces, that's JavaScript, and Svelte will automatically run that and render it in this HTML. So if we save this here and we go back to the browser, now we can see that our hot loading local dev environment woke up and automatically rendered that here. So this could be whatever we wanted it to be. We could say text here, we could do operations. That'll show that. We could do something like 2 + 5, and Svelte will handle it. So I'm going to leave it as the date for now. Just to recap a little bit, we discussed single page applications, and we created a routes.js file, and in that file we defined our routes. Each route points to a Svelte file, which is a component, and then we wired up the router in our app.svelte file. And so as we browse to routes in our browser, the Svelte framework will handle rendering the components that those routes are pointed to. In the next lesson, we're going to create an admin layout, and that'll act as a parent wrapper component for all of our admin components. In this lesson, we're going to continue with the Svelte front end and work on an admin layout. So layouts are a technique for creating a common parent component that can be reused across multiple child components. So we could use it, for example, for something like a nav bar that would be at the top of all admin components. And we can also use it to run shared initialization logic. For our school lunch app, we'll create an admin layout, and we'll use that for all of our admin pages. And then we'll use it to initialize a user object, and later on when we add authentication, we'll enhance it further to handle authentication logic. We can get started by creating a dummy import into our routes file. So we're going to adjust our routes a little bit to use the admin layout. So we need to reconfigure the routes to use a nested approach. So we're going to replace this section that we had before with a slightly different configuration. So what we've done here is we've continued with the admin manage menus route, but then the component that will directly point to will be our admin layout, and then our admin layout will route to a nested route, which is our lunch menu admin component that we created before. In this case, index is special, and it just refers to root in a web app. So you can kind of think of this index as being the same thing as saying index here would be the same thing as leaving it blank. We imported the file, but we haven't actually created it yet. So let's create admin layout.svelte under source views admin. And here's the code for that file. So what we've got here is another layer in between app.view, which handles the main routing. Then all admin routing will flow through admin layout and then route to the proper admin page under that. So similar to what we did in app.svelte, where we imported the router and then we have the router component. Now in admin layout, we import route and then have the route component. And we pass down the current route. So it's kind of like a pass-through. and then we just put the words admin layout at the top. So go ahead and start the local dev environment if it's not already started. And come back to the browser and check out the app. So now we've got the words admin layout and then our actual lunch menu admin component. So the admin layout is working so far. Next, we're going to talk about stores and lifecycle functions. Svelte has a concept of stores, which are objects that hold state that can be used by any other Svelte component. So this is real similar to Redux in React and Vuex in Vue. And the admin layout file that we just created is a good place to initialize a user store that we can use throughout the application. To do this, we'll create a simple file called stores.js in the source directory. And it will export a writable store called user. And then we'll work with it in the admin layout. Another big concept that's very useful in Svelte apps are lifecycle functions. So there's a few lifecycle functions that can be used to run code at specific points when loading and rendering a Svelte component. The onMount function runs just after a component is rendered. So as something is loaded to the browser, the onMount lifecycle function runs, and it's a good spot to load data from a server or populate user state in our case. So we're going to update our admin layout to use the onMount lifecycle function and then import the user store and then set an object in the user store. So let's copy this over. Go to our admin layout. Now we've just removed the text admin layout that was here. And to step through this, so we're still importing route like before, and we've still got route in the markup. And then we're importing the onMount lifecycle function, and we're importing our user store that we just created over here in stores.js. So here's where we implement the onMount function. So we refer to it here inside the script, and then inside the callback, we use an arrow function to run the code that we want to run. So what we're going to do here is use user.set and set an object into that store. So this will be the value of the user store. And then later in other components, we can use this user store. So anytime we load a page that uses the admin layout, this code will run. And another very useful thing in Svelte is conditional rendering. At this point, we're setting our user state in the admin layout, but if we tried to use it in another component, there could be a timing issue because of the nature of asynchronous JavaScript code. Sometimes our page may load, but the user state may still be initializing. We can make sure that the admin layout is done initializing by using conditional rendering. To accomplish this in Svelte, we use something called an if block. We'll create a state variable called initialized. Then when the onMount is finished, we'll set it to true. And then in the markup, we'll use an if block to make sure that the application doesn't render the next route in the chain until after initialized is finished. So let's copy this over. So back in our admin layout file, This is where we can declare the state value. So once we're done with user set, we'll set initialized to true. And then down in the markup, we'll add the if block. So the Svelte framework will automatically track the initialized state, and when it's toggled to true, it will render this portion, which will then trigger routing down to the component that we requested. So we're setting our user object in the admin layout. So next, let's actually use it and display some information from it in our lunch menu admin component. So it's very easy to refer to state that's in a Svelte store by just using the $ store name. So copy this and head back to the lunch menu admin component, and we'll get rid of this temporary code that we were playing around with, and we'll add import user from the user store. Then all we have to do is use $user, and then we can refer to anything in that store. So we'll use $user.schoolname. And so this will display the school name here at the top of the lunch menu admin page. So with our hot loading dev environment, save that file. It automatically refreshes the app with the changes, and we can see test school here. That's it for this lesson. We created an admin layout, and we covered several important Svelte concepts. So we're using the admin layout to initialize our state. Later on, we're going to use it to handle authentication and initialize the actual user from auth0. So we're just kind of laying the groundwork for that now. Within our admin layout, we used a Svelte store. And so we wrote that user object to the store, and then we can use it in any other component by importing the store and then using $store name to refer to it. And we use the onMount lifecycle function to do that initialization. And then lastly, we used conditional rendering to make sure that the initialization was complete before rendering down the chain to the route that was asked for. The app doesn't look like too much yet, but it's set up with a basic architecture to support various design and admin functions as we move forward. Welcome back, friends. In this lesson, we're going to work on our front-end styling. Svelte is a front-end framework that focuses on reactivity and user interaction, but it has no opinions about the look and feel of an application. So our current app is very plain. We haven't done anything to enhance the styling, the colors, the fonts, or the look and feel. There's a lot of really nice front-end component libraries out there, Bootstrap being the most popular. And for this course, we're going to use Bulma. And Bulma contains various UI components like cards and modals, and also responsive layout grids. Responsive layout grids are designed to work with both mobile and desktop environments, where the HTML elements flow automatically when the window size is resized, or, for example, when going from a desktop to a tablet to a mobile phone. Here's a quick look at the Bulma website. There's a really nice site here at bulma.io and some great documentation. So check here if you need to reference this. And the easiest way to get started is to use a CDN link to the Bulma CSS file. CDNs are content delivery networks, and they're designed to provide very good performance to static files, and also they optimize caching and reduce geographic latency depending on where you are in the world. So to get started with Bulma, we need to copy this link and add it to the index.html file. So I've copied that link, and going over to VS Code under frontend public index.html, up here in the head section, we'll add the Bulma style sheet. And we're going to leave the bundle.css style sheet alone because that's the one that is automatically built from Svelte. And we'll also leave the bundle.js file alone as well. So save that, and then let me start up my local dev environment. And so we can immediately see a little bit of a change, and this is because we've used header elements here, and the Bulma styles are automatically being applied now to those header elements. So one thing we can do to get started with Bulma is use a section and then a container, and both of these will apply a nice amount of spacing to our app and just kind of improve the look and feel a little bit. So what we want to do is copy this bit of markup right here, section, class section, div, class section, and we'll put this in app.svelte so it will wrap our whole entire application. So going over to app.svelte, right now we just have main and then our router. So now if we add these, and then make sure you close them with the closing tags. Now our whole app, which is represented here by the router, will always have a section and a container element around it. So let's take a look at that. And so now we've got some nice spacing at the top here and on the left. Okay, moving right along. Another thing that Bulma has are breadcrumbs. Click here and see the documentation for breadcrumbs. So they're a kind of a navigational element that you would use at the top of a page, and it helps the user return back to a previous spot and also understand where they are in the hierarchy of your application. So we're going to add that to our pages now. So here's, for example, the lunch menu admin component. So we'll have a div and then a nav with class breadcrumb, and then an unordered list with that makes up the breadcrumbs. So it'll have several different items in it. So let's copy this over, copy this piece, and we can kind of see how to add it in to our lunch menu admin component. So right now we just had the div and the simple header. So let's see here. So this is the whole thing, and so at the top, we're going to replace the whole header with our breadcrumbs. We'll get rid of that section entirely and put in the breadcrumbs there. And now let's have a look at that page. So now you can see that we've translated this into breadcrumbs instead of the simple header, and it's starting to look a little bit better. And the breadcrumbs are actually functional, so a user can click on the home button and return back home. And that's basically it for this lesson. So we added Bulma, and Bulma is going to provide us a nice style foundation, and we'll use some other components from it later, and it'll make the app have a little bit better of a look and feel as well. In the next lesson, we're going to continue with Bulma and create a landing page. All right. In this lesson, we're going to work on a landing page. A landing page is usually deployed to the root of a website and shows the purpose of the site. In the case of a SaaS application, the landing page will explain the features of the site and have a large call to action. The call to action is the main thing that you want a prospective customer to do when they visit your landing page. I pulled up a couple of examples here. So here's a look at stripe.com. So they've got a real clear description of what they do and then a call to action. So start now, which basically means they want you to register and give the app a try. Here's WordPress.com. Welcome to the world's most popular website builder. Start your website. Real clear what they want you to do. And then another example, Basecamp, the all-in-one toolkit for working remotely. And give Basecamp a try. And then this is kind of an interesting little bit of psychology as well, showing that other companies have signed up recently. So companies spend a lot of time thinking about their landing pages, testing different configurations and seeing what performs the best. But I think you get the picture. We want something simple that has a button or a call to action for users to sign up for the app. So ours is going to be much more simpler than those examples. We're going to create one that looks like this. So on the left-hand side, it'll say easily publish your school lunch menus. And then on the right-hand side, it'll say register now and have a few inputs for a registration feature. In the last lesson, we added Bulma to the project. And Bulma provides a layout system that's based on columns. So I'm going to copy this example over and just to show you a simple example of how it works. So we've got a wrapper class of columns and then two classes within that of a column. So this one would be the left-hand column because it's the first one listed. And then this one would be the right-hand column because it's the second one listed. And Bulma will automatically lay those out and then resize them if the window changes size. So taking this simple example here, let's go over to home.svelte and paste that in. And then look at the app. So go on to home.svelte. So we can see our information is laid out on a left-hand column and a right-hand column. And if you've got dev tools open, this is a nice way to test different resolutions. So you can actually just pull this over and eventually you'll see that Bulma responsively wraps those columns at a certain breakpoint. And you can even click this button here to test different mobile layouts and tablet layouts. So another neat feature with Chrome dev tools that helps you developing websites. So that's a basic two-column layout. And what we're going to do is add a little more information. We're going to use a notification wrapper class, and that'll give it a background color. And then we're going to use the two-column layout and then put text inside one under a content div. And then on the right-hand side, we're going to have a couple of fields that will capture registration information. And so this second part right here is the field side of the registration form. And so each field has a div class field, and then a label, and then a div class control with the input underneath it. And then lastly, we'll have a little button underneath the main section that will have a already registered button. And so if a user lands there that's already registered, they'll have a way to log in directly. So let's copy this over and paste that into home.svelte. And then give that a look. So now that we've got some HTML on the page, we can use our dev tools and we can inspect it. And so we'll see the same markup that we put in our Svelte file over here. And we can do some neat things here from dev tools. For example, we can edit the styles. So I've clicked on section, so I could say background color black. And so this is a good quick way to test styles. Now these changes are not permanent. They're just for this session in memory in the browser. So as soon as I hit refresh, that change will go away. But this is a great way to troubleshoot, inspect, and even test out different changes on the fly. And once you've got them figured out, then you can put them back into the source code. You can see our login button down here. But if you click this button, nothing happens. And nothing happens when you click the go button. And then nothing happens when you add values to these inputs. In the next lesson, we're going to look at Svelte event handlers. And that'll allow us to attach functions to the click events for these buttons. And then we'll also look at input binding, which will allow us to access these values and use JavaScript to interact with them. So that's it for this lesson. Look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, welcome back. Where we left off last time, we finished creating our landing page, but our landing page doesn't have any interactivity. So even though we could type into these inputs or click these buttons, nothing happens. So we'll start addressing that in this lesson, and we'll cover the concepts of input binding and event handling. When we say input binding, we mean taking the value of an HTML input and updating an underlying reference variable in JavaScript, and then inversely taking values from JavaScript variables and displaying them in the inputs. Sometimes this is called two-way binding because it will work in either direction. Svelte makes it pretty easy. All we have to do is use bind value equals varname, and we just put that directly on the relevant HTML input. In the case of our landing page, we've got two inputs right now, the email address input and the school name. So we'll create two state variables, and then we'll bind our inputs to those variables. So let's grab these two variables and go over to home.svelte. So we don't have a script section at this point, we only have markup. So we'll add a script section to the top. And we put those two variables in there. And then we need to add our bind directives. So I'm just going to copy this little bit here, and this will be for the email address input. So right down here in the markup, find the email address input, and we'll add that directive there. And then likewise on the school name input, we'll add another one, and this time we'll use the school name variable. And so just for demonstration purposes, let's say we set this to test@test.com. So we've set the email address variable, and we should see it now in the form. So there you can see that that underlying variable has been bound to the input. And here's another way to visualize this. We can, anywhere in a Svelte file, in the markup section, we can add JavaScript by using curly braces. So let's say div email address is, and then we'll add curly braces, and we'll refer to the email address variable. This is just temporary code just to test it and and show the concept. And then we can do the same thing for the school name. So now we've got email address is test, school name is undefined. And so as soon as we start typing into this input, you can see that Svelte is automatically two-way binding the value from this input to our variable and then reactively showing it up here. And then if we change this one, the same thing will happen there. So that's input binding. And so basically we're getting the values of our inputs bound to a variable in our JavaScript. And then we can do things with it. Like for example, we could send that information to a server to save it in a database now that we have it in the JavaScript variable. So let's clear this. Get rid of this. Okay, here's another scenario. Imagine that we have a clear function. So we might have something like function clear, and we would say email address equals null, school name equals null. So this would be something we would use maybe after the form has been completed and we want to clear it back off. And so when we did that, again, Svelte would automatically update those inputs and clear them. Okay, so get rid of that sample code. Now let's talk DOM events. So we have a couple of buttons on our landing page, but they won't do anything until we add event handlers to them. And Svelte has an easy approach for handling events. We just need to use an on directive. So we say on, event name, and then the function name that we want to call when that event happens. So we don't have a backend for our application yet, so we're not going to actually register a user, but we'll just stub out a click event handler for the go button. So we're just going to show an alert whenever the go button is clicked. Later on we'll come back and address this. So let's add function register. So there's our function. At this point it's just sitting in the script and it's not really going to do anything until we add on click and then call that register function. So I'm copying this little bit and going down. So here's the button. So paste that in there. And so now Svelte is going to handle click events and call the register function when a click event happens. So let's give that a try. Now our alert is going to show the values from these inputs. So I'm just putting some test data in there. And so now you can see that event's handled and we show an alert, email is test, and school name is school. Okay. Now one more thing in this lesson. We still have a login button to deal with. And later on we're going to introduce auth 0, and when a user clicks login we'll actually redirect them to auth 0 to perform the login, and then they'll come back to our app. But that's a little ways away. So for now we're just going to redirect the user to the lunch menu admin component when they click the login button. So to do that we're going to use the navigate component from Svelte router spa, and that'll let us trigger navigation through our spa routing. So let's import this navigate component here. And then copy this bit of code here. And so you can see kind of the outline of it. So we've got the navigate component. We tell it where to navigate to, and then we put the button inside it. So we'll go paste that there. Now we don't need a click handler in this case because the navigate wrapper component handles that for us. So now when we click login, it'll perform that navigation and drop us straight into the admin area of the app. So those are two other important concepts in Svelte, and then one concept from Svelte Router Spa. And this is the last lesson for a little while on the front end. Next, in the next module, we're going to work on the backend Express application. So I'm going to do a review of everything in the front end that we've covered so far. So just looking at the code, we've initialized our Svelte app. So we've got a public folder, and inside here has an index.html, and this is the base HTML file for our single page app. So inside this file, we got rid of a few things, and we've added a link to the Bulma style sheet. And then under source, we've got our app.svelte file. So this is the main entry point file, and we added a little bit of markup here. We added a section and a container, and then we added our router component here. So everything flows through this entry point, and then the router component renders the appropriate page component for whatever route the user has gone to. And to accomplish that, we're using Svelte Router Spa, which is an open source library, and then we created a routes file. So our routes.js file looks like this, and it's got the information for each route and what component each route should point to or render when that route is accessed. Then we did something special on the admin part. So whenever we come to a route that starts with admin/manage menus, then we've got a admin layout, and then underneath that admin layout, then we've got nested routes. And so far we only have one, which is our index route or the root route directly at admin/manage menus, and we call the lunch menu admin component for that. So our admin layout looks like this, and it's kind of similar to app.view. It's kind of another entry point to all the admin pages. And so we've done a little bit of initialization here. Inside the admin layout, we use the onMount lifecycle function, and so this will run whenever that admin layout is first accessed. And then we also use a Svelte writable store to write a little bit of state. So we initialize our user state here, and it's just dummy data at this point. But it's good to learn the concept, and later on we'll come and actually use real login information from a real user. So we initialize our user state there, and then we set an initialized toggle flag, and we use conditional rendering here. So we only show the route that they're trying to access after initialize has been toggled over to true. So first we start it as false, and so therefore this won't be shown or rendered. And then when onMount is completed, we toggle it over to true, and then this will render the route that the user is trying to access. And so that's basically it so far. We've also got our lunch menu view page, and that's just kind of an empty page sitting there, a placeholder that we'll deal with later. Our home.svelte file we were just working in, and this is our landing page. So this is where we did input binding and event handling. And then lastly, we've got our lunch menu admin page, and we haven't done a whole lot here, but we did import the store, and then we're accessing the store using $storename.propertyname syntax, and then we added some breadcrumbs here to make it look a little bit nicer. So this is really good progress. We've got a functioning front-end application, and we've got pages set up. We've learned about conditional rendering. We've learned about input binding. We've learned about event handling. We've learned about stores and routing. So we've covered quite a lot. And we're going to continue next after this with the backend. And so we'll kind of switch gears for a little while and start working on the backend portion of the application. So thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.